All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Alex Ibe, Dean of Humanities and Sciences here at Weatherford College. And our presenter today is Dr. Ann Mayo, Associate Professor of Biology here at Weatherford College. And her topic today is Take Me to Your Leader, or Who is in Charge? Dr. Mayo, take it from here.
Thank you. Let me share my slides.
Oh, while you are sharing your slide, I need to remind our participants that we cannot see them and we cannot hear you. But if you have questions, you should use the chat room to pose your question for Dr. Mayo.
Uh-oh. Program is getting confused here. So I'm going to be talking to you about the idea of freedom kind of loosely, but with respect to social insects. All right, let's see. Try this again.
Okay.
That doesn't look right. What happened here? Yeah, that's there. All right, let's try this again. It seems to be, PowerPoint is not, doesn't seem to want to open up. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So do you see just the slide or you see the other part too?
I see the other part too on the side.
Right.
Okay, now I'm good.
Right. That's what messed me up before, I think. So my topic is Take Me to Your Leader, Social Insects and Freedom. And I want to first start with some considerations about freedom in society. So this isn't great philosophical thinking, just some general aspects we might want to have in our minds. So when we think about freedom, we often think about the ability to make choices or to pursue our own individual goals or lives. And here I'm showing you, kind of free of constraints, these birds are flying out of this bird cage. So I want to ask you, though, to think about, are we also talking about something maybe deeper than that? So let's look at what this might mean for our social organization. So when we talk about freedom, that's definitely going to say something, especially in the context of sociality. So when we have our society, elements have to come together to balance this, right? What's good for us as an individual, what's good for the whole. And that's true for any organism that lives in a social setting. The benefits, though, are hopefully to have a better life and maybe even to survive better. So you can be protected from disease or predators, find food better, those kinds of things that would affect our lives. If we think a little bit more biologically or ecologically, benefits can include mutualisms. So if you think about insects pollinating flowers, for instance, that benefits the flower, the plant, and those insects. So that's a mutualism. A symbiosis is a mutualism that's really very, very intimate. So I'm showing you that in this picture on the screen there. The top is a lichen, which is a fungus and an algae or cyanobacteria living together. And below you can see a diagram of that structure. So the kind of straw-colored part that's very boxy is going to be the fungus part. And then you have the little round circles that represent the algae. So there's a layer that the fungus makes for the algae to live within it. And that way the fungus can draw in nutrients and minerals and water, and the algae does photosynthesis, and they share that with each other. And in that way, they're able to be a very different kind of organism. They're very unique. They have all kinds of great possibilities and characteristics. And often these two partners have to live together. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can live separately. But when they come together, they'll make these special forms. In our benefits also, that particular organization may be a family or a colony, a tribe or a population. But then they can also come together to make a bigger entity, like a town or a community or a whole nation. So there's all kinds of support going on within this organization, leading to greater possibilities. But these benefits can also be, they can be exploited or even withheld. And in biology, we think about that as parasitism, right? You might even think about kind of negativity, social parasites. With social insects in freedom, then, we've got several different things to talk about. So I'm going to look at a comparison with people, social insect diversity, use social insects in particular, and focus on ants to talk about their colony structure. So just in general, there have been a lot of comparisons, and these are some of the folks that have done that kind of work with humans and social insects, starting with Aristotle all the way up through Alexander Pope. And basically what they say is insects are social because it is their nature. They have to be. They're defined that way. And of course, not all insects are. But we do have a great deal of social diversity in our insects. So it's not just bees and ants, it's also earwigs and grasshoppers. Cockroaches are social. In fact, termites are the epitome of a social cockroach. We have caterpillars and other arthropods, including spiders, can have some social species. What we're talking about is they're making a transition from being solitary to social living. And in doing that, often they start out as a family group, although not always. But if they're a family group, that means they're genetically related. And you see here in the bottom, this is a beetle that is actually providing maternal care to her offspring. So those are her grubs. And then above, we have a bunch of cockroaches hanging out on a piece of bread. So this is a family unit feeding there. And then beside them are some tent caterpillars. And normally they'd be within this tent that they have spun to protect themselves. So this organization, if it's really social, requires communication. And that can allow for a division of labor, basically agreeing, you do this task, I'll do this one. And so we can work together. For use social insects, we're really talking about a small portion of our insects. That's going to be the Hymenoptera, which includes all of the ants, and some bees and some wasps are social. Some of the bees and wasps are also solitary. And then the termites, which are, as I said, kin to the cockroaches, they're also eusocial. What do we mean by eusocial? In biology, we're talking about a group that is going to have a division of labor that's based on their reproductive ability. They're also going to care for their young, and they're going to have generational overlap where you have the queen and a male producing the young. Those young germinate or develop, and they are going to then take care of the next group of young, and perhaps even another generation or two beyond that. Some ants can live for 40 years, so you're talking then about that much generational overlap. I'm going to talk specifically about ants because they're extremely diverse in this regard, and of course, I know the most about them. So first of all of our ant species are social, and they're dominant social insects. They are the most prominent of all of our social insects. They're most widely distributed, so they're everywhere on land, except, as you can see here, Antarctica, and they're also not at the North Pole. That's a little bit too cold for them. But we do have some ants that specialize in colder areas. They're also numerically the most abundant, 10 to the 15th living ants at any particular moment of time. That is a lot of ants. And of course, they have a great diversity in their colony organization. So I'm going to kind of summarize that to give you an overview of how their colonies are organized. How are they social? There are two theories about how colonies got to be formed initially, so originally. And of course, the question is, well, why would you form a colony? There are benefits to forming a colony, and there are two ways that they think it might have come about. From some kind of aggression and domination, which also allowed compensation to individuals who were dominated. And that would be one female dominating others, and then they formed a colony group. The other idea is through kin selection, which is often called voluntary altruism, where some of the females, they're going to work together to make a nest and raise young, and then some of those females will give up the ability to reproduce in order to take part of building the nest, raising the young, feeding the young, and maintaining the colony. And it turns out, if you include some aspects of aggression, domination, compensation in the kin selection idea, that wins out as the reason why this developed in the Hymenoptera and the termites. So when we look at ant colony structure, we're going to have these castes. So this is talking about how the jobs, the tasks are defined based on reproduction ability. So queens are reproductive, they will make eggs. Males are going to fertilize those eggs, so they'll mate with the queens. And then we have female workers. And the female workers can be in a range from not having ovaries at all to having ovaries that are immature to having ovaries that they actually can lay eggs, but they're not mated. So the only eggs that they will lay will be male eggs, all right? And that has to do with my second point here about their reproduction and sex determination. In the Hymenoptera, not in the termites, but in ants, bees, and wasps, sex determination is by whether you have one set of chromosomes, that's called haploid, or you have two sets, and that's called diploid. You and I have diploid sets. We have one set from our mom, one set from our dad, so we're diploid. In the case of these guys, though, or these girls, the females all come from fertilized eggs. So the sperm from the male fertilize those eggs, so they have a set from their dad and a set from their mom. They're diploid. And that is true whether you are a queen or a major or a minor worker or some other level of female ant worker. The males come from unfertilized eggs. So that's only the egg from the female, not male sperm used to make that male. And what this does is it actually puts constraints on the females because most of them, the workers, are not reproducing. So they're not actually having their own offspring. So what are the consequences of this? Well, there are two things to talk about. One is just kind of interesting, and the other is a point that we're trying to get to here. First of all, males have daughters because their sperm are used to fertilize the eggs, but they don't have sons. They have grandsons. So their daughters may mate and then have sons because they'll have the sperm and they'll have the eggs and they'll be able to have haploid offspring, which would be the sons. So that's just a brain teaser. Then the big point here for us is that sisters could be as closely related as 75% if they share the same father, okay? And so what's happening here is that they are actually more closely related than normal siblings would be. If you and I have a regular sibling, we're only 50% related at most. These are 75% related. They're also more related to their sisters than they are to their mother, and then their mother is to them, okay? So that makes really strong kinship, and that also contributes to this desire or being part of a colony, because actually raising their sisters gets more of their genes into the next generation than if they had their own offspring. All right, having that little biology background, the colony then gets organized based on these castes or these jobs. So the queens and males are going to be the reproductives, and the workers would be all of the different jobs that happen in the colony. With our queens, we can have one queen in the nest, that's called monogyne, or polygyne means many queens. So we can have that going on. Most ants are monogyne, but several species are polygyne species. The workers will be in subcastes, and they can be, if it's a monomorphic species, so all the workers are basically the same size, same shape, then they are going to differentiate the tasks based on their age. And that's a different thing we'll see coming up. But the one you're probably more familiar with are ones that are polymorphic, and they're going to have soldiers or majors and minors and maybe other groups as well. So if you look at this slide at the top, you've got a Fidoli ant, so they're big-headed ants, and the major is the one with the large head, and the one that it's facing is a minor of the same species. And then beside this, we've got a major of a turtle ant. So this is a soldier, and its head is quite different, very flattened, very hard. And if you look to the right, it's using its head to close up its nest opening. So that nest is being attacked, and it's not going to let anybody in, and it's closing it with its actual head. So it is quite specialized. And then below you see a variety of different castes in one group. The queens, the males are very small at the bottom, also with wings, so they're elates, they can fly off. And then you have intermediates and then workers here in this group. So variety in some groups, only one form in others. That colony organization, though, that we just talked about, those different groups are going to be located in different areas of the nest. And so we need to look a little bit at nest structure, which can vary a lot. So we have acorn ants or twig ants that live literally in a little twig or in an acorn. That's the entire colony. It's probably 10 to 15, maybe 20 individuals. They don't have to worry too much about their nest structure. But some of our other species do, and we have here a leafcutter ant nest in Brazil. It's quite large. You can see the people that are digging it out. So they poured concrete in it to maintain the structure. And over here on the right is Walter Schinkel, who is a professor emeritus at Florida State. And this is a nest cast he did with aluminum of a Pogonomyrmex species in Florida. And you can see it's got lots of tunnels and then chambers. So the chambers are where the ants would hang out, where the food is kept, where the queen would be, the eggs and other young. And then at the top, you've got lots of chambers because the ants that are going to go outside the nest to maintain the mound that's external and forage are going to hang out there to warm up as the sun hits those areas. You also have workers that are tending these offspring and the queen that will move the eggs, larvae, and pupae up and down in the nest to get them into a temperature area that's appropriate for their development. So that's going to be a big task. And you can see that the different ants will be in different areas during different parts of the day. The tasks we're talking about are food gathering, so foraging, tending the queen and the young, and you see that in these photos to the right, nest building, and then the elates, which are involved in reproduction, and the queens would do the colony founding once they've been mated. I want to talk especially about food gathering, foraging, and nest building as examples of this. Let's talk a little bit more about the worker castes first. So there's variation in behaviors among the workers so that they can do all the tasks that we just mentioned. Their morphology is going to be important, and also if they can switch to a different task. So we have a caste polytheism, which means the morphology is very specific to the task. That's what we saw in some of the ants we saw earlier. It includes differences, especially in the head and jaw, that are meant for doing a specific task, which means it can be very difficult for them to do anything else. So they can be very specific. We can have age polytheism. In this case, the tasks are based on the age of the ant, and they typically have basically the same morphology. And it turns out the youngest ants are the ones that tend the queen and the young, the eggs and larvae, and the old ladies are the ones that go out to forage and protect the colony. And the oldest old ladies are the ones that are left outside at night when they close the nest. And so that's the ant that would help dig out that nest the next day, okay? Up here in the photo, we have leaf cutter ants, and you've got foragers that are carrying the leaves. But look, on one of them, you can see some little ants there. Those are minims, so they're the smallest in this particular species. And they actually have a function here. So it turns out that there are flies, forage flies, that are parasitic. And those flies will attack a forager and lay their eggs in that forager. And what these minims do is they wave their legs and antennae and chase the forage flies off. That protects these foragers. And so you can see if they were bigger ants, they couldn't be carried on those leaves, right? So their size is very specific for what they're doing. Then the last group we have, which is kind of odd, just in some species, ants just seem to stick to a particular task, even though their sisters may be doing other things. So there's some variety here in how the tasks happen. The age polytheism group is the group that's doing the most task switching, but it's based on age. Overall, though, we have to coordinate these tasks, right? You have to make sure you have enough foraging done. You have enough care of the queen, enough care of the nest and taking out the garbage. So how does that happen? Is that orchestrated by the queen? That's what most people think. And that's why I titled the talk, Take Me to Your Leader. But in fact, that's probably not at all what's going on. Ants mostly are going to have to act as groups of foragers to complete their task. And so there's got to be some other kind of coordination going on here. We call this non-hierarchical decision-making. There's not any leader, but we have mass communication from one group to the next, and finally to individual ants. This is going to involve a lot of feedback loops, and especially in ants, we're using a lot of chemical signals that we call pheromones. They also do antennal tapping, so they take their antennae and touch each other with it. They can smell each other that way and communicate that way as well. They're not going to use much visual signals because in the nest it's dark and they don't do dances like the honeybees do. They may use some visual signals, but that's going to be outside the nest where there's actually sunlight. Overall, we call this a self-organization, and sometimes it's referred to as swarm behavior. But we still have to have some kind of idea of how do you do that, right? If nobody's telling you what to do. So generally, we have this variation in how quickly some of the ants begin a particular task. So if they're digging, one ant may be the first to start digging, and others would be slower. They might begin to dig because they see this other ant digging, so they may be imitating, or seeing that may just set off a cue to them that it's time to start digging. That's going to produce this multiplier effect. So you have one individual that sets off a few others, and then you have groups now that are going to be doing that same behavior. But you still have to integrate all those efforts to that particular task. So it turns out one ant may be doing the task. So say one ant is digging and taking the dirt outside the nest, and you could have another ant that's outside the nest bringing dirt in. So it looks really chaotic. You're like, what is going on? Well, it turns out having that, it's kind of like homeostasis in our bodies. You have a little bit of both things going on. So when you need more of one, you just up that one. And if you need more of the other, you can be flexible and go the other direction quite easily as well. So this kind of two things going on at once adds this flexibility and responsiveness for our colonies. So I'm going to talk about this a little more with these two ideas of nest building and foraging. So for instance, you'll have an ant starting to dig a hole to make a chamber, and you might have other ants digging other holes around it. But at some point, they kind of decide which hole is going to be the one. And that has to do with interactions with that soil and whoever's digging the fastest and other kind of interactions that they might have. So you end up actually with completing the new chamber or the nest entrance. So that's going to be really important. We also have some ants that make arches inside their nest as part of that structure. And to do that, it turns out, actually this is in termites, it turns out they make a pile of stuff on one place and they'll have these random piles. But if they start making a pile on top of another, that stimulates them to begin to focus on that area. They do that on another one and they bring those two up till they form an arch. So again, seemingly random responsiveness of individuals, but it then begins to coalesce and build this complexity. Now, I've seen this idea also with nest maintenance, which is really kind of crazy. They'll take out their trash and they don't quite get it to the edge of the mound, which is usually where they deposit it. Another ant will encounter that and move it, put it somewhere else. And ultimately, it will get to the trash pile. I've also seen foragers come in and drop their forage and go right into the nest. And then another ant comes across that forage, picks it up, and brings it in. So they have these set patterns to do this behavior. And by all of them doing a little bit, it works out to accomplish the goal, getting the forage in, getting the trash out, building the arch, making the right hole. For foraging, we have a similar thing going on, but it's a little bit more complex. We have a hunger state of the colony that's more important than the individual's hunger state. And for many ants, this means they have a communal stomach. And here's what happens. The foragers can bring food in like insects and they feed that to the larvae. The larvae are actually able to eat that and they turn it into liquid stuff that they would then process for themselves, but they can also hold back and feed that back to the forager or the nurse that fed them. And then that ant can go and feed other adult ants. And so that's how often they share nectar and insect material and even seeds that the larvae can actually chew up because they have different kinds of mouth structures. One of the interesting experiments that has been done about this is they took a ant colony in the lab, divided it in half, and half of it was well-fed and half of it was not well-fed at all. And so they had the hungry ants be able to go back on their foraging trip that wasn't effective, to go back to the side that was well-fed. And it turned out when they did that, those ants that were not well fed didn't forage as much and they didn't forage as often. So they were being impacted by the sense that the community was not hungry and they were probably also fed. So those are some of the interactions that go on to help change what behaviors are happening. You need to forage when you're hungry. We also have a difference between making the foraging trails. So individual foraging doesn't make trails. Individual ants go out, explore, find forage, and bring it back. They don't lay down any pheromone trail, chemical signal to go to a particular area. Other colonies that are much larger typically will make these pheromone trails. They go out, find great forage, they come back, they lay down the chemical signal. That's the way to go. And they bring the forage in. and then their sisters follow that same way. And that trail will stay intact until the forage is gone. They've eaten everything. You can see up here a trail made, and that's actually made by Pogonomyrmex ants, the big red harvester ants have made that in the grass by foraging in that direction year after year after year, because that's where the flowers are that they get the seeds from. And then the last thing is cooperative foraging. Some ants are really good at this and some are not. Its effectiveness depends on really good communication. So here you have several ants on a caterpillar, and the caterpillar is alive. They're bringing it to their nest. The nest is not very far away from this photo, but this particular group is having trouble getting into the nest. And that's because each of them has a pattern of where the nest is, they can see it, and how to get it there. But they're not all in the same orientation. And that means some of them think going one direction is the way to go, and some of them think going a slightly different direction. So what you see them doing is going one way, then another, then another, then another, and then one will let go and stand back, and somebody else comes in, grabs that place, and it takes them longer to get the food in. Other ant species do this very, very quickly, in seconds even, because they have excellent communication. So a variety of how they can coordinate this kind of stuff, how their society operates. Lastly, I want to mention to you that there's a variation that's based on colony size. So smaller colonies tend to be generalists. They don't have very many members and they're monomorphic. So these ants have to do all the tasks, and that means they're going to switch from task to task based on the feedback they get from the colony. Does it need to be protected? Do we need to take trash out? Do we need to forage? All of that stuff. Individually, they don't have set behaviors, so their behavioral repertoire is kind of small, but they do more learning because they have to learn all these tasks. They have to encounter it and figure out what to do. Larger colonies, they were specialists. There are huge colonies, and they tend to be very polymorphic. That means they have morphology specific to certain tasks and have difficulty doing other tasks. So for instance, soldiers rarely tend the young. Their mandibles are not such that they can handle the young. So only in an emergency would they do it, and they don't do it very well. However, they have a large behavioral repertoire that's determined, and they do less learning, but it also means they have a great deal more very involved communication. So finally, coming back to looking at humans, we do actually use social insects as models for human behavior. So for instance, the Southwestern Airlines used models of ant behavior to try to figure out what was the best way to get people on an airplane, okay? And people have used it to figure out what's the best way to get people out of a building that's on fire. How many doors do you need out of a particular room? Overall, what we see is ants really don't have leaders, and they don't really have plans, but they each have a pattern for particular tasks, and they involve that pattern, they invoke it, and as it's enacted, all these individuals comes together to make that goal, to accomplish that or solve that problem. And so they're working out their solutions by, as a group, trying various experiments until one of them actually solves this or accomplishes that goal. This looks like the epitome of pure democracy. Humans, on the other hand, of course, we have leaders and we have plans. We consciously choose those goals and make plans that we think will accomplish that goal. And the leaders direct this process, right? But as you know, it doesn't always work, right? There are setbacks, things get broken, you have to regroup, the idea didn't work very well. But also, we don't always work together very well, right? If you've ever worked on a group project as a student or given group projects to your students, you know sometimes the personalities kind of clash, they can't really work it out, and things don't happen the way you would hope. So there are a lot of different things going on in these two groups. Maybe we need to think a little bit more about using the ant approach rather than just the top-down approach. So some conclusions from this, instincts for our insects really are pretty rigid, but there is learning capabilities, but of course kind of limited. The multiplier effect and that coordination of individual action leads, though, to flexibility. You can accomplish the goal, but if suddenly you need a different goal, because things change over the day for these insects. Their colony, the structure could collapse. They got to deal with that. Or there's an invader. You know, there's a horned lizard out there eating them up. They got to deal with that. So they need that kind of flexibility. There are also constraints on the insect brains. They have limited options for their social organization, And we see that because most of the ants and bees and wasps have a very similar organizational structure, but it arose independently several times, okay? And then finally, of course, there's a limited degree of what they can actually attain, right? They're limited by, they only have so many neurons and so much time in their lives. And then lastly, I just want to throw out some questions to you to get you to think a little bit more about freedom. So in this sense, though, we're seeing there's some genetic determination here, but still there's a lot of flexibility, decision-making, and some learning happening. Does that suggest that freedom is maybe an illusion? Is freedom really a higher brain function happening in our cerebral hemispheres? Is freedom just this feeling, this joy or this strength that we have when we make a decision and we carry it out? And ants just don't have the brain power to have those kind of feelings because they do have some choices, right? So how are they restricted? Something to consider. You can also think about with ourselves, we have specializations, right, in our careers. And as we do that and get very, very specialized, it can be difficult for us to take on another career. You know, you're so much older, you know computers, or you know medicine, or you know how to be a secretary really, really well. That's a big deal to start changing, all right? Same kind of thing for our ants that are very large colonies with very complex social structure, but also very specific roles and tasks. So there are a lot of interesting, I think, similarities here that we might want to reflect on. That's what I have for you. I think Dr. Ibe can open it up for questions. And if there are other questions you want to ask me, you can email me at amayo@wc.edu. Thank you. Should I stop sharing?
Oh, you've done a great job. Thank you so much, Dr. Mayo.
If I do that,
Now, let's entertain some questions or comments. Go to the chat room.
I don't see anything in chat.
I don't see anything in chat either.
Well, do you have any questions or ideas you'd like to talk about, Dr. Ibe?
Well, it's quite interesting, you know, your presentation. What's so exciting is...
Uh-oh. Dr. Ibe, you disappeared. I'm not sure what happened to Dr. Ibe. Let me just go back to a couple of points that I was trying to make. So a lot of this, what's going on in the ants, I think really is very much like what our bodies do with homeostasis. So in general, you may be aware we have, there he is, back again.
Sorry.
That's all right.
My internet just acted up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, like I had trouble at the begining. Did you have something you wanted to say for me to respond to, Dr. Ibe?
What I was saying in the process, I like the structure, you know, that every organism, every living organism, no matter how small they are, have their own structure and order by which they carry out activities and survival skills. So
right.
That's amazing to know.
Yeah, the ants are really interesting because, like I said, some of the species and the one I study actually has a lot more flexibility because they're a smaller colony. So their tasks aren't so specific, and they will switch from being a forager to doing nest maintenance if there's nothing to eat, the colony isn't hungry, and there are things to do to build more chambers. If the colony is expanding, you're going to have more members, so you have to have more chambers. So as they grow, and the species I studied probably lives as much as maybe 40 years. So by that point, there can be maybe up to 5,000, probably not more than 8,000 individuals in that colony. That would be really large for this species. So yeah, it's really interesting how they can switch back and forth without having somebody directing them, hey, today you do this. It's a matter of their individual interactions. The other thing that I think is really interesting that I was just about to bring up is the comparison with the way we do homeostasis. And I know you're very familiar with this. In our own bodies, we have the autonomic nervous system that we're not consciously aware of, but two divisions, the parasympathetic and sympathetic, and they work against each other most of the time, but you always have a little bit of each. And so when you need to be more resting, you start emphasizing that. But the other part of being excited doesn't totally go away, probably. If you're going to be more excited, you emphasize more of that. So you have this flexibility, so you're prepared to change according to what's demanded of you at that moment. And that's kind of what these ants are doing, right? They're digging holes and filling in holes. They have that flexibility. Oh, no, we're really digging a hole now. Oh, it's changed, because during the day, their nests can collapse inside, right? And they got to suddenly switch. So they're ready for an emergency in a way that maybe our societies are maybe not quite fully ready. We work on that, right? Readiness for emergency. So it's kind of interesting to see that and to see that parallel too, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, great presentation.
Thank you.
Very enlightening, yeah.
Right.
And but having the aged females watching the nest at night, that's very kind of peculiar. Is that all the job they do?
I'd say that again, Dr. Abe, is what all they do.
The aging females, they seem like the older females are the ones outside protecting the nest at night when everybody else is sleeping or something like that.
Right.
Is that the only assignment given to them?
No. So what happens is, as they get older, they're going to become the foragers and act to protect the nest. So if another ant comes there, they would be the ones to attack that ant or chase them off. Okay. When they close the nest out at night, one or a few of them will happen to stay outside.
Oh, I see.
They might just do that one time. And they're not exactly guarding the nest. Basically, they're there so that when the sun comes up, they're going to get warmed up first. And they'll start digging out the nest because they have to get busy and get out of the nest to forage before the other ants get out there, because there's competition.
Oh, okay.
So, and the other thing is, because they're older, they're expendable. The nest can lose that ant if something eats it in the night.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, if you think about it in human society, this isn't so nice to do to your grandmother, right? But that's what's going on with that. And in fact, they'll start digging in. They'll actually go along the nest mound and investigate it thoroughly as it gets warmer. And finally, they'll decide where that entrance should be and start digging there. And often, but not always, the ants on the inside will dig in the same area. Sometimes they dig in a different area. So how do you coordinate that too, right? So they've got to be kind of aware of the sound or something, that the tension changing in the soil surface, to know to connect those two pieces. So yeah, it's not the only thing that they do. It just happens that particular day or night. And that's another good thing to bring up though, Dr. Ibe. We think of the ants as being really busy. And in fact, they may not be all that busy. So a lot of the foragers, a lot of the ants may be inside the nest waiting for something to do. You see lines of ants going out. That might be that one ant. That might be the only time it goes out to forage, because there could be thousands, billions, or trillions of ants in its nest. And so, it's dangerous to go outside. It's dry, it's hot, you can get eaten, you can get lost, the wind can blow you away, all kinds of things can happen. So it's nice if you have huge numbers of sisters, you just go out once and forage, and then your sister can go, and your other sister can go. And so actually, Deborah Gordon, who's at Stanford, did some studies on this, and she said, yeah, the ants are actually very lazy. Hanging out inside playing pinochle or something. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not quite as energetic as we often think. Yeah, it's really interesting. And that maybe that's like our complaints sometimes when we look at construction crews, right? Or the highway construction crews. You see one guy working and everybody else is watching them. And so maybe that's a similar idea. Actually, it works quite well, right? Because that guy gets tired, then somebody else can take up that job. Or you see what's, did that accomplish it? Is that what we need to do? Or are we done?
That's right. Wonderful.
So different ways to organize that.
Yeah. Well, very good. Thank you so much again for a beautiful presentation. And at this time, if we don't have, it seems like we don't have any questions from the attendees. Well,
Well, the only thing I can say is, just to go back to the idea of freedom, since we still have some time, let me just make some comments about that, I guess. So I think really we have to think about what do we mean by freedom? And I think a lot of times we just mean, oh, I'm free to choose, I can do whatever I want. But in society, you can't do that. And we have to live in societies. We are a social organism. We do not really have that choice. There are people who say, well, yes, I can go off and live by myself, but you didn't get here by yourself, right? You were grown inside a woman's body. You were born, you were taken care of, you were raised to the point where you can make that decision. So all of us are inherently social. And I think it's a real important thing to think about. What are we doing when we agree to be social, and how are we going to talk about our individual freedoms? And I think that's a real big issue right now, as we can see in several things that have developed in this country and others as well. And in the ants, you can see also they had originally a kind of choice, and they chose to be social because they survived better. And now they're really stuck with that. I mean, their genetics has reinforced that. But they have fights too. These females that can lay eggs and are laying them, their sisters come around and eat those eggs so that they don't get to contribute the male offspring, at least not very much.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so there's battles in there too, which of course we wouldn't like to think of females eating their babies, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But that's one way they can try to control that situation, right?
That's right.
But I think those are important things for us to think about. And I think the parallel with the ants, of course, it's a parallel. It's not the same, but I think we can look at that and see some similarities with the way we structure things, although we have higher brain functions that maybe make us look at it very, very differently. But perhaps it can give us some insight about that, or maybe feel a little kinship to these organisms that seem so weird and different from ourselves, that we share some facets, right? Of course, we're more complex, but nevertheless, certain goals that you have to have in a society and the ways that we go about achieve them. So bottom up, leader demanding it, so top down, or bottom up from the people coming together. I don't know.
Well, freedom is a very a lot of times we misuse the word freedom and not understanding what it actually meant,
Right.
in fact, at 11 o'clock, I'll be on the panel talking about academic freedom and how academic freedom transcended the freedom we all enjoy in our society, in our constitution. Without the academic freedom, there will be no freedom as such, because this is where we teach people the right versus wrong, and for there to be knowledge gain, and for there to be scholarly inquiry leading up to those laws that afford us the freedom. So we as a society, we need to do more job in talking about freedom, and and letting people understand the whole concept of freedom is not just a word you say.
Right.
There are consequences also that goes with freedom.
Yeah. I think you're quite right. I want to raise one thing, because you said that, Dr. Ibe, also that I think even the way that I express freedom, kind of generally how we think about it, I'm wondering if it's not also something much deeper, maybe even a little bit spiritual. Maybe that's not quite the right word. But I think, especially in America, we think about we're the home of the land of the free, right? What do we mean by that? Doesn't that kind of catch you up in your throat? It's kind of a emotional, spiritual type piece. I think you're right. I think we need to think more deeply about what it means than just, I get to choose, I get my way, which is very, very selfish. And of course, what's happening for the ants, they've got a kind of altruism. Now, it's not quite like our altruism would be, but they have given up certain things to have that society. And at least initially, willingly so. So I think you're right. We do need to focus on that in a lot of different ways, academic freedom, especially the freedom of the press, the right of free speech and those kind of things. But we need to couch it, I think, in this bigger, who are we as human beings?
Exactly.
Because I think
we say we are the land of the free, but are you free? The free with the people talk the freedom to to worship, the freedom to bear arms. But we say there's a restriction in terms of freedom to choose, or freedom to vote, or freedom to. So the freedom, is it freedom for everyone, or is it an unlimited freedom, or there are restrictions with this freedom that we talk about? Who gets to enjoy the whole freedom and who doesn't, and who dictates it? So there are quite a lot of things to talk about, but all those inquiry starts from academic institutions, and then as we educate people, they take those knowledge out there and maybe try to become lawmakers and be able to formulate good laws that governs the whole civilization. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's all those kinds of different connections, and we focus sometimes on those individual tasks and not maybe the bigger picture.
That's correct. Yeah, well, thank you again. I appreciate you doing this. And if our guests don't have any question, maybe we can end this session, and then I will go and have 15 minutes to prepare for my panel discussion.
Right. Well, that'll be good. I want to thank everybody for coming. And if you do have any questions later for me about ants or this ideas I've tried to put forth about thinking about freedom, feel free to email me and I'll respond as best as I can. And wonderful. Thanks for coming. And I hope you enjoy many other talks. I think there are a lot of good talks going on, and Dr. Ibe has this panel going on, so we got to get ready for that too. Thank you, Dr. Ibe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayo. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.